Welcome to Europe Debates. I'm Richard Milsom, the Executive Director of the European Conservatives and Reformist Party in Brussels. Today we are greatly honoured to be joined by a stellar panel of leading diplomats and parliamentarians in order to discuss the normalisation of relations between the UAE, Bahrain and Israel. The last year has been a renaissance for the Middle East peace process. Over the course of the last 2 months, relations between the State of Israel and its neighbours have been thawing and unwinding decades of tension in the region. The Trump plan has so far seen Israel signing official peace treaties with the Bahraini, the United Arab Emirates, paving the way for opening up trade, travel and full recognition. With the normalisation of relations between these countries, the door is now open for many more in the Middle East to come forward and bring peace to the region. Now, this webinar today is live streamed across multiple social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and our website. And we're very grateful for the many people that have registered and will be following this debate live. Please do use the comment sections to ask intelligent questions, which I will try to relay the panel if time allows. But rather than listen to me, I think we should get it started. So let me first introduce to you our first speaker, which will be the ECR Party Secretary General, Anna Fotyga. Now, Anna is a Polish MEP, former Foreign Minister of Poland and Chair of the European Parliament Security and Defence Committee. She served as Vice President of the ECR and was recently re-elected as the Secretary General of the ECR Party. She also has a special advisory role for NATO's political arm. And I know, Anna, that you've got a busy day and you may not be able to spend the entire debate with us today. So perhaps you could start off by formally welcoming our guest ambassadors and please offer some comments. Over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Allow me to echo your very kind initial statement, welcoming officially on behalf of the ECR, European Conservatives and Reformist Party, this 10th European debate seminar, and I'm really happy to participate in presentation of a very positive development that recently, due to endeavors of many partners, but in particular 3 countries of the region, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates and Israel, was achieved over political divisions. This development has been praised by politicians and experts, public figures dealing in particular with security issues. I would like to mention that also due to endeavors of the ECR party, we are the political grouping of European and having broader outreach that was very much dedicated to peace issues and developments in the Middle East. It is really high in our agenda for already quite many years. I would like to mention also the Warsaw Conference in February of previous year, dedicated to the peace in the Middle East, developments in the Middle East, that gave a certain platform for debates on those issues with participation of both Prime Minister Netanyahu and US Secretary of State. So once more, Excellencies, very warm welcome. We really consider this development. Peace treaties reached between United Arab Emirates and Israel and Bahrain as Israel as very positive development for all of us, for international community. Thank you.
Well, Anna, thank you very much for that. You're a great expert in foreign affairs diplomacy. I know you've done it for many years and have been a great friend to all of these countries. Within the ECR Party, we will continue to do this in the future to support our friends and allies. As a party, we're very, very grateful for the ambassadors coming on today. Let me now pass it across to Charlie Weemers. Charlie Weemers is a Swedish member of the European Parliament since 2019 from the Sweden Democrats Party. Previously, he was chairman of the Young Swedish Democrats and elected to the Hamro Municipal Council. In Brussels, he sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. And Charlie, whilst he hasn't been in the European Parliament that long, has been incredibly active and has all sorts of things that he's doing. And actually, we're very grateful to him, particularly for this event today, because this is his initiative, this is his idea. So thank you on behalf of the party to Charlie for helping pull this together and do this. I wonder, perhaps we've got a very diverse audience that's online watching us from all over the world. So perhaps, Charlie, if you could start us off with a general outline of the Abraham Accords and perhaps how this accord has been received in EU circles and sort of put it in context so we can take the debate forward. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Richard. It is a great pleasure to be here today, and I would like to warmly welcome our speakers and all our guests. The recent decision by the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Israel to normalize relations has truly been historic. Their visionary leadership has been essential. We must also applaud the Trump administration for their efforts. Their support in this process has been crucial and significant. The Abraham Accords feel as euphoric and significant as Israel's earlier peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan. The Accords, however, include another dimension. For it is very encouraging to see with what speed this new friendship has blossomed. Mutual visits, the signing of a wide variety of agreements, and the opening of skies, with Israeli planes being able to fly over Saudi airspace and vice versa. Despite the Middle East not really needing any more heat, the commitment to warm peace on both sides is very heartwarming. It truly feels like a start of a new era, one of dialogue, mutual respect, and cooperation that may lead to endless possibilities and foster long-term prosperity for all citizens in the region. That brings me to our webinar today. I very much look forward to hearing from our distinguished ambassadors and learning more about the Abraham Accords and their potential to transform the Middle East. As a first question to all our speakers to start the discussion, could you perhaps share how we got to this historic moment in the first place and what wider impact the Accords will have on the region?
Excellent, Charlie. Thank you very much for that. And we're definitely going to be covering these questions throughout the webinar. So thank you for that. And let me now pass it over to our first ambassador. In no particular order, we're going to start with His Excellency Mohammed Issa Hamad Bouchahab, who is the ambassador to the United Arab Emirates to the Kingdom of Belgium. His Excellency took up the position of ambassador in January 2017, and in a distinguished diplomatic career, he's held posts as the Director of Policy Planning in the UAE's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Director of Department for the America and Pacific Affairs, as well as five years at the Permanent Mission of the UAE to the United Nations in New York. He has a bachelor's degree from the American University in Washington, D.C. He joins us from Belgium. We're greatly honored to have you with us here, Ambassador, so thank you. Could I just sort of start things rolling? The UAE has embraced the principles of peaceful coexistence and mutual respect as cornerstones of its foreign policy. The UAE's Vice President and Prime Minister, His Excellency Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, stated that the UAE seeks to be the global reference point for a tolerant culture. Last year, the UAE celebrated its Year of Tolerance to devote efforts in building a tolerant society that believes in the importance of the human communication and entrench the values of dialogue and openness to different cultures as part of a wider policy to fight extremism. The Dubai Expo, which has obviously been moved to next year due to the COVID pandemic, has the theme of connecting minds, creating the future. UAE is also working on establishing the Abrahamic Family House, which brings together a mosque, a church, and a synagogue in one setting. So perhaps could you expand on some of these concepts as they relate to the UAE's leadership's historic decision to normalise relations with Israel? What drove the UAE to this point, and what more can we expect from the UAE as it continues to assert itself as a global player in the fight against extremism? Several questions in there. Over to you.
Well, look, thank you very much, Richard. And let me begin by thanking the ECR and honorable MEPs for this initiative and for inviting me to speak in this important event. You're absolutely right in pointing out that the adoption of the Abraham Accord really emerged out of a tradition in the UAE that we have regarding openness and tolerance. This is something that really has long roots in our history as a country. We've long been a hub for seafarers and traders. However, I'd say that the decision to actively build a culture of tolerance, openness, and acceptance really goes back to our founding father, Sheikh Zayed, and has become a critical element of our success as a nation, really since its formation. The UAE story would have been impossible without a culture of tolerance. Key sectors of our economy, travel, tourism, require openness and tolerance. And without embracing tolerance, we would have been unable to develop the way that we have. As a result, the culture of tolerance has really been hardwired into our DNA and has become a source of pride and a matter of conviction for the UAE. However, I'd say over the past decade or so, as we witnessed a new wave of extremism that threatened to engulf the region around us, we recognize that we cannot be an island upon ourselves, and that to succeed, we needed to foster tolerance in our region, beyond our borders. This explains why my country has taken an increasingly active role in fighting extremism together with our allies, as we did as part of the global coalition against Daesh. And this has also been the basis of a number of high-profile projects we undertook to foster the growth of tolerance, both nationally and internationally. You already mentioned some of these, including the Year of Tolerance, but we've also appointed a Minister of Tolerance in the UAE, in the UAE cabinet and government. And of course, prime amongst these initiatives has of course been the landmark visit of Pope Francis to the UAE in the beginning of 2019. The visit set up a committee on human fraternity with religious figures from the three Abrahamic religions cooperating and working together to foster greater interreligious dialogue and tolerance. And of course, the visit also brought about the decision for the Abrahamic Family House, which you mentioned will be built in Abu Dhabi and houses a mosque, a church, and a synagogue in one place, and really to become a meeting place for the three religions where dialogue and understanding can be fostered. The Abraham Accord emerged out of this long-standing tradition, are part of our desire to present an alternative regional project to the world that breaks from the cycle of violence and hatred that has really held back our region for so long. And as I said, this is really a matter that's part of our national culture and conviction, which is why we will continue to launch initiatives that foster tolerance and push back against extremism. The next one, which is coming up now a year later than it should have, is Expo 2020, which you also mentioned. And it will be the first time after the pandemic for the world to come together and reaffirm its commitment to liberal and open international order. This will also, these same values will be part of our effort that we plan to bring to the UN Security Council. We have launched our campaign for a non-permanent seat in the UN Security Council for 2022-2023. And so you can expect more of these initiatives coming from the UAE side as well.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you very much for that. There's lots of interesting points in there. And also, I can't wait for next year because I think we should we should move ourselves to Expo 2021 in the United Arab Emirates. Certainly the weather will be better as well. Thank you. We will come back to you on some of those things. Now, let me please turn to Her Excellency Dr. Bahir Jawad Al-Jissi, who is the Ambassador to Belgium from Bahrain. In fact, not only because she's also the Ambassador to Denmark, Luxembourg, Head of Mission to the European Union, and Bahraini Ambassador to NATO. So quite a portfolio that you have in front of you on your desk. Now, she was previously a member of both chairmans of the Arab Parliament and a newscaster with BBC Arab Service and Bahraini Broadcasting, an advisor in the Prime Minister's Court, as well as many other senior positions representing children, women's issues, and UNICEF. She holds degrees from the University of Boston, London, and Egypt. And I believe she joins us from the embassy today in Brussels, where we're delighted and very grateful and honoured to have you with us here, Dr. Bahir. Thank you. Perhaps if I could give you a short question. Given Bahrain's strategic location in the Arabian Gulf, it has for many years been a bridge, if you like, between the cultures of the East and the West. And over the last few years, the kingdom has also been very active in being that bridge between the Arab world and Israel. In 2017, we saw the first public visit from the Gulf to Israel by several religious leaders from Bahrain. And last year, Bahrain hosted the Middle East Peace Conference, which was a significant lead up to the Abraham Accords. Could you expand on how Bahrain views its role in shaping this peaceful coexistence in the region? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I thank you for your introduction, which shed some light on the kingdom's legacy of tolerance and coexistence. I think, in a region that's mired by various attempts to spread violence and instability, this deal is a step towards national and regional security. It's now our responsibility to work actively towards a lasting security and stability in the region. This is, you may agree with me that this is really a very courageous step taken by His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, and it reflects his vision towards a region that enjoys long-lasting peace, security, and prosperity by signing the Abraham Accord, which is a declaration of peace, cooperation, and constructive diplomatic and friendly relations with the State of Israel. Bahrain is keen on preserving its legacy of diversity based on values of tolerance, coexistence, and respect for all religions, cultures, and ethnicities. Therefore, signing the Abraham Accord not only brings to light the history of openness that Bahrain takes pride in, but also paves the way towards the future Bahrain envisages for the region. So it is now our responsibility to work together towards a lasting security and stability in the region. We aim at leaving behind the conflicts, destruction, and mistrust that would endanger the future of generations to come. And we aspire we actually look forward to replace to see that lasting peace in the Middle East by enhancing regional security and stability. However, we feel also that peace cannot be achieved in the region without preserving the rights of the Palestinian people, according to the Arab Peace Initiative and all international legal frameworks, reaching the two-state solutions. And this is actually what King Hamad insisted on in his speech at the opening of the National Assembly last Sunday. He actually, he put this line, underlined this in his speech, that this is actually, without this solving the problem, we will not reach a lasting peace in the Middle East. Because even if we sign accords, we have to find a solution so peace will be lasting forever. That's we live in a very turbulent region with threats from different places. Iran is not very happy about the deal, that, because this threatens its plans to destabilize the region. So, you know, with all the threats and the turbulence in the region, we have to take a step to, you know, to assign deals and alliance with our friends to work together for lasting peace and security in the region.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bahir. I don't think any of us on the European side have any illusions as to how complicated and how difficult this is. You know, it is an incredibly complex region. You know, we offer our support and we want to help in ways that we can and that are fit. But this is why this kind of discussion is very important. To have these views directly from the ground. So thank you for that. Again, we're going to come back to you on several of those issues. If I may now, because time's ticking on, move on to His Excellency Ambassador Eron Lesno-La, who is the Israeli ambassador here in Brussels. Forgive my pronunciation, but Ambassador Lesno was born in Tel Aviv, and he joined the Foreign Ministry in 1981 after having served 8 years in the IDF. His foreign posts include Washington, D.C., Canberra, and Singapore. And prior to the Oslo Accords, he was a member of the Israeli delegation for Middle East peace negotiations, and later on for peace negotiations with Lebanon. He equally served as the coordinator of the Israeli delegation to the Multilateral Working Group on Palestinian Refugees, and was the ambassador of Israel to the United Nations in Geneva from 2008 until 2012. Prior to coming to Brussels, Ambassador Lesno-La has served as Deputy Director General and Head of the UN of the International Organizations Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he was appointed here in Brussels as to the European Union and NATO, Ambassador to European Union and NATO in 2016. So you had time to cut your teeth on it and understand Brussels and all that's going on here. Ambassador, Israel has enjoyed peace agreements with Egypt, Jordan, but the Abraham Accords signify a real and recent shift in the Middle East dynamics. Moreover, the wishes of the UAE and Bahrain to fully nurture a warm peace has been warmly welcomed by the large majority of Israeli citizens, including Arab Israelis. What was your response to this historic decision between your country and the UAE and Bahrain? As a seasoned diplomat, was it something that you ever expected to see during your lifetime? With the signing of the Abraham Accords, do you believe that Israel has finally been, if you like, rightfully accepted by some of its neighbors as a sovereign country in the Middle East?
Good morning, and thank you very much for this generous introduction. Frankly, after 4 years in Brussels, I finally know how little I understand about this city. But I have one more year at least to learn more about the way that Brussels is operating. I want to thank ECR, not only for hosting us today, but for being such a good friend of Israel and such a great support for us in the European Parliament. So thank you very much for that. MEP Fotiga is a strong friend of Israel, like many of you, most of you, if not all of you in the ECR, and we appreciate that. I'm also happy to share this platform with my colleagues from Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, and I look forward to establish a friendly and close relationship with both of them. And it is also correct and right to mention at the beginning the role that the United States of America played in matching between Israel and its Arab partners and bringing about this agreement. The role of Washington is pivotal to the efforts to bring stability and prosperity to the Middle East, and we look forward to other countries in the region joining Israel, Bahrain, and the UAE. I have to mention that the agreements that we signed with these two Gulf countries are on the following the footsteps of the agreements that we already have with Egypt and Jordan, which are the cornerstone of peace between Israel and the Arab countries. And since signing the agreements with Egypt in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and with Jordan in 1994, we've established a solid, even strategic relationship with those Arab countries, much of it discreet, sensitive, a lot of it in the public. So we look forward to other Arab countries joining Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, and Bahrain. What makes me happy as an Israeli diplomat, an Israeli citizen, is not only that two Arab countries joined officially and publicly the Circle of Peace, because we had different kinds of relations with Bahrain and the UAE on different levels for many years now. In fact, at least since the signing of the Declaration of Principles with the Palestinians in the South Lawn of the White House in September 1993. I missed the South Lawn event last month in Washington, D.C., but I was there in 1993 watching the late Rabin, Peres, and Arafat shaking hands and signing the first agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. What makes this time these agreements different than previous agreements is that it's not only an agreement between governments, but you could immediately see the natural connection between the peoples in the free countries. In fact, Israelis didn't wait for the signing of the agreement to take the airplanes and fly to Bahrain and the UAE, two countries which are open for Israeli tourism, while we have difficulties to travel to European countries. And there are many examples of this people-to-people connection. I will mention only one, which is very touching for me as a football fan. An Israeli football player signed in the last few days a contract with a football team from Dubai. The name of the football player is Dia Saba. Dia Saba is an Arab Israeli. He is also a player in the Israeli national football team. Half of the Israeli national football team players are Arab Israelis. So that's, I think, a nice example of this Israeli-Arab cooperation and bond and people-to-people interaction. And I will finish this opening remark by with a message to the EU. That is also should be part of my closing remark, but I want to say it at the outset so that it will become part of the discussion that you will have later. The EU is not and cannot be a bystander in this event. The EU must be a player. You have an opportunity here to contribute to peace and stability in the Middle East. Don't miss that opportunity. Look for ways to participate in the making of peace in the Middle East. Become a player, not only a bystander. And one example to show European role, a constructive European role, is the way that European institutions were involved in bringing about an agreement between Israel and Jordan that will allow overflights from Europe to the East, to the Gulf, to the Middle East, to the Far East, via Israeli and Jordanian airspace. It's a fantastic agreement that was signed in the last few days that will tremendously and dramatically help European tourism, European businesses, reduce pollution, and it's an example of a European role that will benefit both Europe, Israel, and Arab countries. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. And it leads us nicely into our next slot on the EU. I do particularly like the analogy with the football, because politicians talk and football changes. But thank you, and we'll come back to you on many of those things. So please let me now introduce to you Bert-Jan Roesen, who is a Dutch politician and a member of the European Parliament. His party is the Reform Party, the SGP, which is part of the European Conservatives and Reformists group family. With a background in plant science and agriculture, he first entered politics in 2006 as a councillor in Primpen, before being elected to the European Parliament in 2019. Again, he's another very active MEP. Since arriving in Brussels, he's an active member of the committees on agriculture, fisheries and foreign affairs. And he's also first vice chair for the EP delegation with relations with Israel as well. So, if I may, Bert-Jan, the Abraham Accords were brokered in the United States. That's traditionally always played this facilitator role. But which steps do you believe the EU could take in support of the Abraham Accords? Should the EU shift its policy towards the region? And if so, how? And what potentially could be the role of the European Parliament within this? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your introduction. And I would also start with by expressing my thanks to the ambassadors of the three countries for being with us today at this unique moment in the history after the recent conclusions of the Arab Accords. And I would also like to thank Lesnar also for his clear message in relation to the position of the EU in this process. And I think his message is real clear. His message is also the EU has to become a player instead of a bystander, and that's I will say that's out of my heart. I think we have as a European Union to play also a role in the peace process by supporting these kind of agreements and by facilitating this kind of peace agreements to have a really positive approach in relation to Israel, but also in relation to the Arab countries. So yes, I see an important role, and also in the plenary debates and so on, we will stress for, well, let's say a more positive approach from the European side in relation to the Middle East and the peace process. I think an interesting question is how the signing of the peace agreements may affect the Palestinian-Israeli conflicts. And I can imagine that the fact that we have now these agreements between these three important countries, that maybe can open new doors also in the process, the peace process between the Israeli sides and the Palestinian sides. And I would like to ask, well, the ambassadors maybe to reflect on that. How do they see indeed most possibilities also in supporting the solving the problems, the conflict between Palestinian and the Israeli? Thank you very much.
Bert-Jan, thank you very much for that. And of course, that's that is absolutely the focus of the next section of this debate, because you know, whilst we can all see the immediate benefits by improving relationships in terms of trade and travel and tourism and stuff, you know, there are deeper issues that need talking about within the region. Now, as we enter this section, can I bring back Charlie Beamers? Because I know that there are, this will form the basis of the next series of questions. So Charlie, if I hand over to you, and then I'll get the ambassadors to respond to the questions as they come through, okay?
Thank you, Richard. I have two questions, actually, and the first one refers to Ambassador Leshnoyar, who noted that the EU has become a bystander of sorts. And indeed, while the EU welcomed the Abraham Accords and gave credit to the US, it has since been rather quiet about the historic decision. At the same time, it continues to express its support for the JCPOA. Moreover, we see Iran continuing to support terrorism and undermine the stability of multiple countries in the region. If the EU is truly committed to nurturing peaceful relations in the region, can it in fact be a credible player if it continues with its current policy of enabling the Mullah regime and continue its false distinction between Hezbollah's military and political wings? Can it, or only after it recognizes Iran's negative and destabilizing role in the region? Now, the second question. 2 days ago, we welcomed the Palestinian Prime Minister to the Foreign Affairs Committee for an exchange of views. I posed a question concerning the worrying tendency of the Palestinian cause being intertwined with incitement and terrorism. Mind you, on the EU's terror list, 7 are Palestinian. And Palestinian polls consistently show that around half of Palestinian society support an armed struggle against Israel. This mindset entirely goes against a peaceful resolution. Although the Palestinian Prime Minister expressed support for the Abraham Accords, we have also observed many of the Palestinian authorities strongly condemning it. How can the UAE and Bahrain convince the Palestinian people and its leadership to denounce terrorism and embrace cooperation as a way to achieve prosperity and peace? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Charlie. Now, just for your information, and sadly Anna Fotiga has had to leave us, so she's got a NATO meeting. Basically what I'll do is I'm going to get, because I mean, whilst the question I know was directed towards Israeli ambassador, I think all ambassadors should be able to comment on this. So could I perhaps start, ladies, first with the Bahraini ambassador, Dr. Bahir. So could you have a stab at, firstly, the EU being a bystander? You know, what does it need to do to become a credible player within this whole issue? And then maybe a comment on the Palestinian-Israel struggle and where progress can be made.
Well, you know, I think, you know, I agree that the EU should also be a player in the region. When it comes to Iran and its efforts to destabilize the region, we don't see much, you know, we don't see much effort towards Iran and what's doing in the region, not only in the Gulf, but also in the whole Arab world, in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, the whole destabilization in the region, Iran is behind it, and Hezbollah. And we don't see any effort by the EU to do something about it. I agree with that. You know, there have been so many efforts by Arab leaders to talk with the Palestinian leaders about, you know, the initiatives. There were so many initiatives, peace initiatives, which were, you know, which needs more negotiation. Now, I think the only solution is to sit together and do, you know, and just have negotiations to reach, you know, a just solution and have stabilization in the region. Without negotiation, nothing will happen. Even, you know, the EU, Saudi Arabia, they have been mediating and trying to put things together. But the EU cannot do that by itself. You know, the EU ambassador can talk about that. So we need joint effort by all the parties together to think about, you know, a dialogue, to sit together and discuss all things. You mentioned the Prime Minister, the Palestinian Prime Minister. I did, you know, I did not hear him myself, but what I heard about what he said, he wasn't very happy about, because he said this deal actually done by United Arab Emirates and Bahrain for their interest, not for the Palestinian interest. This is something. These things need to a dialogue. So many, some Arab countries are not happy about what Bahrain. That's why I said it's a courageous step, because it brought to us so many, negative attitudes towards Bahrain and United Arab Emirates. But we have to do that. We actually look forward to seeing that the fruits of the Abraham Accord. We want to show the people that there are, this is. We look forward. We are not looking at the present. We are looking at the future. So we want, to see cooperation in various fields, which talks already started in Bahrain. And we had some official Israeli delegation who visited Bahrain, and they started the meetings with their counterparts in all fields. So we are doing this, and when we see the fruits, I think it will take time to convince the people that this is a step towards a lasting peace. It will not come, today or tomorrow. It will take some time, but we are actually aspiring a lasting peace in the future. And I think all of us, not only the United Arab Emirates, the EU as well, the American, United States, everybody should take part in this to convince also the Palestinian leaders. A few days ago, there was an interview by Prince Bandar bin Sultan. He was an ambassador of Saudi Arabia in Washington. And it was a long interview that he talked about the initiatives and the deals that Saudi Arabia tried to do with the Palestinians to reach some solution, but it was fruitless. So now I think the Arabs are doing something. The United Arab Emirates also is doing something. Maybe they are not talking about it publicly, but I am sure they are playing their role in this. So I know the Palestinian people maybe inside Israel are not very happy about it, but when they see that it's bringing peace, and that's what I said, if there is no solution to the Palestinian problem, there will not be peace in the Middle East.
Okay, yes. Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Meher. If I could turn now to the Israeli ambassador, Dr. For over a decade, we could observe the geopolitical shift in the Middle East and the growing convergence of interests between Israel and many of the Gulf countries, including vis-a-vis Iran. Israel has for years warned of Iran's dangerous policies, including its support for terrorism. But bearing in mind the questions on the table as well from Charlie, I'm sure you're a great expert in this and understand this extremely well. In your view, what impact, if you like, do the Abraham Accords have on the regional stability vis-a-vis both Iran and Hezbollah, and obviously the peace settlement with Palestine and Israel?
Well, I'm happy to say that I agree with everything that my colleague from Bahrain said. Clearly, on many things we see eye to eye, both on the regional challenges and threats, and also on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I listened carefully to what the Palestinian Prime Minister had to say to AFET, to the Foreign Affairs Committee. Our message to the Palestinians is very simple: return to a dialogue with Israel. Nothing good will come out of the absence of dialogue, and the Trump peace initiative is a good basis for such a dialogue. We know that not everything in the plan is of your liking, but that's the essence of dialogue and negotiations, that both sides are speaking to each other and reaching a compromise. The other message that we have for the Palestinians is resume security coordination with Israel. It's important for Israel. It is even more important for the Palestinians. So we call on them to return immediately to the security coordination with Israel. And the third message is, we have money that belongs to the Palestinians in our banks. Come over and take it. It's your money. They refuse to do that. They are upset, they are angry, fine. But why punish the Palestinian population in the West Bank and Gaza by not taking the money from Israel and approaching others, donor countries, to give them money instead? It's your money, take it and do with it good things for your people. On Iran, I think that we have to carefully consider the position of the EU and European countries. I think that we have to understand better what is the European interest, and to understand better what is the Israeli interest and the interest of the different Arab countries. And then we have to discuss, and it's not a philosophical discussion, what is the best way to approach such a player, such a regional power, I should say, as Iran. Will you get results by courting the Iranians, by placating them? I think that so far, recent history proved that efforts to appease the Iranians created the opposite result. Iran became more aggressive. Iran felt that they have a free hand in the region. Iran became more cruel in dealing with its own population. And the silence of the EU is deafening. Is deafening. How can you remain silent now, with all due respect? A press release is not a response to the execution of innocent Iranian citizens. So your silence is not only a message to Iran. Your silence, not ECR, your silence, European silence, is a message to your friends in the region. Iran is not a friend of Europe. We are friends of Europe. The Emiratis are friends of Europe. The Bahrainis are friends of Europe. And you're sending us the wrong message. We want to trust Europe. We want to count on Europe. So we have to do things a little differently. And we need a real, sincere, professional, and serious discussion between Europe and your friends in the region to find out what will benefit you and us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. In fact, I mean, this is really good stuff to hear, actually. But before I turn to the UAE, I just want to bring Berchan back in on particularly that thing about the common European foreign policy, because there just isn't, okay? And there are contradictory and conflicting signals that are sent, particularly on countries like Iran. So perhaps Berchan, would you like to comment on that and the direction of EU foreign policy and where you think the EU can actually start to make a difference here?
Yeah, thank you. Well, concerning indeed the foreign policy of the EU, we have to realize indeed that still speaking about foreign policy, it is primarily it's responsibility of the different member states, and what you see that different member states have different views on the Middle East and Israel. I think that's one of the reasons that that the EU is, like Mr. Lasmiyar said, is really silent in this region. And I think indeed that the EU must make more clear that indeed Israel, but also the countries Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, these are our friends. And we have to realize also as EU that Iran is a big threat for the region, and that we have to take a more, let's be stronger position in direction to Iran. We are now as EU too doubtful too weak in the position, and we have to support more. Israel and countries who are willing to sign agreements with Israel. For example, let's give an example. I think let's for example as EU work on association agreement with Israel. I think it's maybe 8 or 10 years ago when we had our last meeting at the high level of that association agreement. Let's, as EU, invest again in building up better relations and also investing in the association agreement. That would be my response to that.
Super, excellent. Thank you, Bertrand. Ambassador Abu Shab from the UAE. So can we come back to those two questions, namely Palestine, Israel, and Iran?
Well, let me start with what more Europe can do, because it was mentioned quite a bit by other speakers who I agree with. I should say that we're very, very pleased with the very positive reactions that came out really from many EU member states and EU institutions as well. But I think more can be done there. We did receive offers to support from many European countries. Many others are working with us to try to use the positive momentum that's been triggered by the accord to push forward the Middle East peace process. And I really think that Europe can play a very constructive role in encouraging a return to the negotiating table, especially by convincing the Palestinian side to really not squander this opportunity, to grasp this opportunity that's at hand. And like I said, I think there has been some work that's already been done here, and we look forward to continuing to work with our European partners in this regard. Europe is also a very important partner for us in the region when it comes to fighting extremism and fostering tolerance. And we believe that this is really a common project and is in our shared interest. So here, really, we welcome some positive measures that have come out from European allies. For example, we believe that Germany's ban of Hezbollah was a very positive step, and we urge our European allies to now take the step to move forward with banning Hezbollah at the EU level. While we understand that there are some differences in approach when it comes to dealing with Turkey and with Iran, we also have warned for a very long time about the destabilizing policies that these countries have taken in the region. And I think many in Europe are increasingly realizing that they need to calibrate their approach towards these countries. And of course, how to do so, that's a matter for our European partners to decide. But for our part, the UAE, we've already shown that we will not stand by as external actors foster extremism in our region, and we'll continue to push back strongly on those actions. But we also remain open to dialogue and understanding on the basis of tolerance and acceptance and respect for each other's sovereignty. When it comes to the European Parliament in particular, I think it is important that the Parliament sends a clear message of support for the Abraham Accord and what it stands for. And I think it also has a role to play in critically debating events in our region and the negative role that some actors play in this regard. And of course, there's parliamentary exchanges with our region that I think would be very helpful. Now, when it comes to Iran, really, I think there's with the JCPOA, it's not that the JCPOA in and of itself was problematic. There were issues with sunset clause and others that I think could have been resolved had it really, done the sort of byproduct that we were all expecting, which was to moderate Iran's behavior. But as Ambassador of Israel just mentioned, unfortunately, what we saw since the agreement of the JCPOA was that it really, felt that it had a carte blanche. It doubled down. It became much more aggressive in the region, and really, I think this is what undermined the prospects for the JCPOA in of itself. Now, what can be done for with Palestine, and what can be the let's say positive momentum that comes out of the Abraham Accord? I think there is an opportunity here that if we were able to get annexation off the table, this was a ticking time bomb for the two-state solution, and we were all concerned about this. Europeans were concerned about this, and while nobody can say that this is forever, it certainly has created some space, and it's this space now. Nobody can negotiate on behalf of the Israelis and the Palestinians. They will have to come to a peace settlement and an agreement, but we're trying to create the environment for that. And I think after the sort of initial reaction from Palestinian leadership, our hope is that they will, also with encouragement from the international community, will return to the negotiating table. Because really, as the ambassador of Bahrain said, there won't be peace in the Middle East until this issue is resolved.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, for that. Really interesting views. Now, we're coming towards the end of our slot, so I wanted to give each of the ambassadors just one final section, just to really comment on what next, really. Okay, so who are potentially the next deals and treaties potentially might be signed with, and also how can the existing ones, the framework that you've got, be deepened to become more productive and more beneficial for both of your societies. Perhaps could I start with the Israeli ambassador?
Thank you. And I appreciate what my colleagues from Bahrain and the UAE just said, and I want to especially thank MEP Jan-Bert Roysen for his continuous friendship and support. We really thank him for that. My foreign minister said publicly that Israel moved from annexation to normalization. And I think that was an important signal to the Palestinians. Don't miss another opportunity to do something good for your people. And this is our call to the Palestinians. And it remains valid. Having said that, the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will not bring peace and stability to the Middle East. Yes, it's good in itself. It will help Israelis and Palestinians. It will resolve a conflict which is with us at least for the last 72 years, if not longer. But it will do nothing to resolve the crisis in Syria, the crisis in Yemen, the crisis in Libya, and the more crisis which exists in the region. So no illusions. It's good to have peace between Israel and the Palestinians, but this is not the end of wars and conflict and strife in the Middle East. We have to be cognizant of this and not fall into this trap of illusion. I think that there is great scope for not only deepening our relationship with Bahrain and the UAE, but also more other countries joining the Circle of Peace, and soon contacts are going on, and let's wait and see. I don't want to preempt any forthcoming announcement. And again, my bottom line is that Europe can play a constructive role in supporting peace, stability, and prosperity in the Middle East. We are your friends, so let's do something together, and starting with fortifying the agreement between Israel and the UAE and Israel and Bahrain. Thank you very much.
That's superb. Thank you. That message is well heard. Now, can I turn to the UAE ambassador? Same question, really. How do you see the cooperation deepening and being more productive and beneficial to your societies? And what next? I mean, we all, you can never rest on your laurels. There's always more work to do. You can't stand back. But how do you see things going forward in the next months and years? You're muted.
I think very, very importantly, the trajectory of the bilateral relations between the UAE and Israel will be very telling. And already, I think what we've seen as far as a broad range of cooperation, coming from cooperation on COVID, cooperation on artificial intelligence, MOUs already signed, joint bids with Israeli partners to develop the Haifa port, commercial flights and cargo shipping lines connecting our countries, plans to initiate student and research exchanges. There are talks now about cooperation in the field of satellites and scientific research. And I think all of these deepening of cooperation really, and this, what's been described as a warm peace that we'd like to see between our two people, really has enormous impact, not just for the two of us, not just bilaterally, but we think for the region. And I think as more countries see these benefits, and really as Israel also benefits, along with the UAE benefits from this, I think there's, in a sense, a peace dividend that comes out of this. And, we believe that this will help by us having contact, by us having more cooperation, more exchanges. This will help also in resolving the Israeli-Palestinian question. But look, I would not underestimate the impact that can have, because some of those players that have been destabilizing our region have been using this conflict. And we believe that if this is put aside and there's more of a sort of alliance, there's more of a critical mass in the region to push back against the interference, then we can have an impact there, and it will have an impact on Yemen and on Iran, in Syria. It's not a direct one, but it's one that no doubt I think can strengthen those that are pushing back on this kind of interference. So I really think that the impact of this, clearly, without a doubt, there is a bilateral benefits. This is absolutely firmly in the national interest of the UAE to have this strong and rich partnership with the very dynamic state of Israel in our region. But we really believe that the impact, long-term, medium-term, goes far, far beyond our two borders.
Thank you very, very much. And Dr. Bahir, kind of the same question really, and whether there's any differences in the potential within Bahrain. But again, how do you see it going forward? Where are the areas for closer cooperation, and who might be next? Thank you.
There were actually, before signing the accord, there were some, exchange of visits and delegations going to Israel. And, there were some talks, but officially, now things became official. And of course, it will be benefiting the two countries, not only Bahrain, the region, and also the Israeli. But we are expecting more countries coming and signing agreement with Israel. With more people coming, this will become really, the Abraham Accord will become stronger, and it will show more effect in the region. As I said before, we are actually we are looking forward to seeing the fruit of this declaration. And I mentioned before that we had an Israeli, immediately after signing the accord, an Israeli delegation visited Bahrain, and there were talks between ministers with their counterparts in the areas of environment, in the foreign affairs, in the industry and commerce, tourism, and also transportation and telecommunication. There were talks between the ministers of these departments, and we are, we not yet started, but we saw the first delegation coming to Bahrain, and we are hoping that this will actually bring attention to the benefit of this idea. And at the beginning, you might see that there are, even Iran, we expect that Iran actually feels that it's threatened by this. And more people, more countries come to this accord, the more threat this will constitute to Iran. So I think the beneficial of this is really, it's going to be very beneficial to the country and to the region as well. And I think it's also might also affect the Palestinian issue in a way. The Palestinians might feel that, with this, the number of Arab countries coming to this to this agreement with Israel, they might feel that it's time for them to sit at the table of negotiation and have an open dialogue with Israel. And I think I also agree with the Israeli ambassador that EU can play a role in this. What I saw here, especially in the European Parliament, actually, what happens in Iran is not in the attention of the European parliaments. At the time when they actually condemn Bahrain, and if all the time there are statements against Bahrain and issues that are actually more in Iran. And I raised this question one time in the meeting in the parliament. I said, why when we had a group of Baha'is from Iran talking about how they cannot even practice their religion in Iran, and the European Parliament doesn't say anything about it. While in Bahrain, for example, we have Baha'is, they have their temples, they have their, they can practice the religion like any other religion, and Jewish, Christians, Baha'is, Hindus in Bahrain. It's an open society, it's a coexistence. And we don't see that European Parliament is paying any attention to what's happening in Iran. So I think it's time now to think of taking a stand towards Iran, because this is the real threat in the Gulf now. In the Gulf, Israel is not a threat to us in the Gulf, it's Iran. So this is actually, we want to see something, a strong stand. And Iran, when they see that more Arab countries joining this I think will have a big effect on the region.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bahir. It's very interesting. Ambassador Abu Shab, did you have one quick thing to add?
Yeah, so just to add a little bit about how we got here in the UAE, and what that can tell us about who may potentially take this this step next. I mean, for us, it really was something, as was mentioned earlier. For years, we have had these sort of informal contacts with Israel. It started with things I always mention: an Israeli athlete who will play in a tennis tournament in the UAE not being able to get a visa. Then, the UAE wanting to host different events, competitions, conferences where we did not want to exclude Israeli athletes or participants. Then into hosting the International Renewable Energy Agency, where we knew while we were bidding for this that Israel would have to have a delegation in the UAE, even while we had no bilateral relations. And so, there was a sort of natural progression, which made it clear for us that it was a matter of time. If it didn't happen this year, maybe it would have happened next year, maybe it would have happened the year after. But no doubt this was something that was, and it was a matter of time. And I believe that there are many other Arab countries that are at different stages in this process. And of course, it's going to be a sovereign decision for each country to decide if the time is right for it, and what it takes, let's say, for them to take this step. But I think it's very clear that there are other Arab countries that are in this process. And so I can't say who will be next, but I can surely say that there are countries that are moving in this direction, just at different paces.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, and thank you to all of you. Can I? We have run out of time. We're slightly over, but we've still got quite a lot of people watching online. Could I just hand the floor to Charlie if you wanted to make any closing remarks before we end? Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I want to start by commending the ambassadors for the constructive approach that you have, and I invite you to engage with us in improving EU policy towards the region. We are at a webinar of the European Conservatives and Reformists, and I just want to say, as a conservative, I try to push for a foreign policy that serves the national self-interest of the European countries, in my case, Sweden. And neighbors at peace is indeed in our interest, economically, for preventing migratory flows, in terms of human rights, and a lot more. When it comes to Iran, Europe is often accused of only serving its own interest. Well, I would say that the European approach to Iran is one of a short-sighted self-interest. Because if we look back on Iranian history, this country has potential for so much more. It could be a peaceful, prosperous country contributing to stability and peace in the region. And I will always have that in my mind when I approach European policy on Iran. And ambassadors, you can always count on me. I will continue to support building bridges between Israel and the Arab world. And I'm always happy to provide a platform for nurturing these relations and the relations between your countries and the European Union. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Charlie, and thank you to all of you. I think it's been a very interesting, lively hour. We're slightly over, but there we go. So thank you so much on behalf of ECR Party and all of us to the ambassadors for sharing your time with us and your views.
Can I say a few words?
Dr. Bahir, please do, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to thank the ECR and for this timely virtual event, which shows their keenness to build bridges and adopt understanding views of the reality and positions of the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Emirates and the Gulf. I also recall the visit from ECR to Bahrain in March 2018, which I think left positive impressions about Bahrain, and highly value some of the ECR's members joining the group of Friends of Bahrain at the European Parliament, which held its first meeting, I think, was with Bahrain's Ministry of Foreign Affairs last month, and we look forward to more meetings to shed light on issues that we share interest in. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for those kind words, and hopefully in the not too distant future we will be able to arrange further delegation visits to all of your countries, and so that we can engage in proper face-to-face dialogue to further our political cooperation and friendship. But thank you once again. Just the notes for the viewers, this whole discussion is recorded. It's on our website at ecrparty.eu, should you like to review it. Do please join us for future ECR Party webinars, details of which can be found online, as well as our social media, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. All that remains for me to say now is thank you. I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon. Stay safe, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.